Over the decades, they've tried to sell us some of the most outrageous, over-the-top, and downright ridiculous products in hi-fi history. Some were actually genius. Most were total gimmicks that somehow fooled all of us. Today we're counting down 12 hi-fi gimmicks that completely fooled us all. We'll dig into why they were invented, how they were supposed to work, and why they eventually crashed and burned. Stick around until the end. The final one is so crazy it had drummers sweating, thinking their jobs were finished. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. It really helps the channel keep going. All right, let's jump in. Spring reverb units. It probably started with one of those late night conversations between audio engineers or musicians. Man, this song is great, but it's too dry. What it needs is more reverb. Throughout the 1970s, major brands like Pioneer, Kenwood, Sansui, and even some smaller companies started bolting physical spring reverb tanks into their receivers and standalone boxes. The dream was simple: give everyday listeners the ability to turn their living room into a concert hall or cathedral with just the twist of a knob. These units used one or more metal springs suspended inside a metal box. An input transducer would shake one end of the spring with the audio signal, and the vibrations would travel through the spring, creating that lush, echoing reverb effect before being picked up at the other end. Some models even had cool illuminated graphics showing the reverb intensity, which looked impressive in a dimly lit listening room. In reality, it was a disaster for most music. The added reverb turned everything muddy, blurry, and unnatural. Voices sounded distant and hollow, guitars lost their bite, and drums became a washed out mess. If you accidentally bumped the receiver or the standalone unit while music was playing loud, the springs would rattle violently, producing a horrible metallic clang that sounded like someone threw a tray of cymbals down the stairs. Even when digital reverb started appearing in the early ADS, the results were rarely convincing in a home environment. Most people who bought these units tried them once, had a good laugh with their friends, and then never touched the reverb knob again. It's a classic example of audio companies trying to solve a problem that didn't really exist for the average listener. We don't actually want our living rooms to sound like cathedrals when listening to rock, jazz, or pop records. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Vertical turntables. In the early 1980s, some manufacturers clearly got bored with traditional flat turntables. Sony, Sharp, Mitsubishi, and a few others decided that horizontal was old-fashioned and declared vertical tracking turntables as the future. The concept was bold and futuristic. A turntable that could stand upright, fit neatly into a boombox, or even mount on a wall as a piece of space-age decor. It promised to save space and look incredibly cool in modern apartments. Because gravity no longer helped hold the stylus in the groove, these designs relied on complex, dynamically balanced, linear tracking tone arms with calibrated springs applying downward pressure. Some models even rotated the entire record vertically while the arm moved horizontally. On paper, it sounded revolutionary. In practice, it was a nightmare. The engineering was incredibly fragile and finicky. Most of these turntables skipped badly on even slightly warped records, suffered from poor tracking, and sounded noticeably worse than conventional horizontal decks. The mechanisms were prone to breaking, and replacement parts quickly became unavailable. The biggest fundamental flaw was fighting basic physics. Gravity is your friend. When playing vinyl, it keeps the stylus securely in the groove. Removing that natural force required overly complicated solutions that never worked reliably. Adding a vertical turntable to a portable boombox also made little sense when cassettes were already dominant and far more practical. It was a solution looking for a problem that didn't exist. These vertical turntables remain fascinating. Curiosities today, cool conversation pieces, but terrible daily drivers. They perfectly illustrate how sometimes the pursuit of being different leads audio companies down very strange paths. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next. Cartridge-mounted brushes. Static electricity and dust have always been vinyl's biggest enemies. Back in the 1950s, British audio pioneer Cecil E. Watts came up with a clever little device called the dust bug, a small sweeping arm that rode the record while it played, brushing dust away before the stylus reached it. Not long after, big cartridge manufacturers like Shure, Pickering, and Stanton took the idea even further. They started building stiff nylon brushes directly onto the cartridge body itself. As the record spun, these brushes would sweep across the grooves just ahead of the stylus, supposedly giving you cleaner playback in real time. On paper, it sounded like a brilliant solution. In practice, it created more problems than it solved. Those stiff bristles introduced mechanical vibration that the highly sensitive moving magnet or moving coil cartridge would pick up, adding a faint background noise and sometimes a slight veil over the music. On delicate belt drive turntables, the extra drag from the brush could even slow down the platter slightly, throwing off the speed. Many owners eventually unscrewed or removed the brushes after a few weeks of use. Some cartridges even came with instructions saying to add an extra gram of tracking force to compensate for the brush's downward pressure. If you forgot to do that, tracking suffered and records could skip more easily on warps. It was another classic case of an audio fix that ended up causing new issues. While the brushes could help a little with very dirty records, the side effects were usually worse than the original problem. Today, most serious vinyl lovers prefer a good record cleaning machine before playback rather than brushing while the music is playing. Color organs. You've got the lava lamp glowing in the corner, the blacklight poster on the wall, and thick shag carpet under your feet. What's missing to complete the 1970s party vibe? A color organ, of course. These colorful boxes connected directly to your speaker wires and use simple analog filters to split the audio signal into frequency bands. Low bass notes would trigger blue or green lights, mid-range brought yellow or orange, and high frequencies lit up bright red. The lights would pulse and flash in time with the music, turning your living room into a mini disco. It was pure visual entertainment with zero intention of improving the sound. Early versions were especially problematic. Because they tapped directly into the speaker signal, the abrupt electrical switching inside the box often created annoying buzzing or clicking noises. Some even acted like antennas, picking up local radio stations so you'd suddenly hear a DJ talking over your favorite record. At low listening volumes, the lights barely moved. Crank it up, and the lights would blast full brightness constantly, with almost no graceful pulsing. You had to constantly fiddle with the sensitivity knob on the back to make it look decent. While they were fun for parties and looked impressive in the dark, the novelty wore off fast. Most people quickly realized they were just flashy distractions that added nothing to the actual listening experience. Color organs are now beloved retro curiosities, great for decoration, but not something most audiophiles would plug into a serious system today. Subscribe, and let's keep uncovering the crazy stuff together. Audio timers. Before smartphones and smart plugs took over our lives, waking up to music or recording your favorite radio show while at work was surprisingly complicated. The solution that many hi-fi companies offered was the audio timer. Pioneer, Sansui, Kenwood, and several others sold standalone timer units or built them directly into their higher-end receivers. The concept was simple and practical on paper. You plugged your entire stereo system receiver, cassette deck, turntable, even a reel-to-reel into the AC outlets on the back of the timer. Then you left all the mechanical power switches on your components permanently in the on position. At the program time, the timer would send power to everything and your system would wake up playing whatever source you had selected. It was especially popular for people who wanted to wake up to their favorite FM station or record a late night talk show or concert broadcast while they were at the office. Some models even had multiple programmable slots so you could set different times for different days. But real life revealed the limitations quickly. Most timers had fairly low wattage ratings, so if you had a powerful amplifier or multiple components, they couldn't handle the load without overheating or tripping. Later in the 1980s, as manufacturers switched to soft touch electronic buttons and standby modes, these timers became almost useless because they could turn on the power but couldn't press play or record on the new equipment. And if you had a wild night with friends and forgot to disable the timer, you woke up the next morning to full blast music with no snooze button and no remote control to turn it off from bed. Still, for a brief period in the late 70s and early 80s, audio timers were a genuine convenience for many enthusiasts. They represent a time when hi-fi systems were mechanical beasts that needed clever workarounds for everyday problems. Smash that subscribe button, it means a lot and keeps the channel going. Dynamic range expanders and pop removers. Vinyl records and cassette tapes were always plagued by background noise, tape hiss, clicks, and pops. To fight these issues, companies like DBX and SAE introduced dynamic range expanders and dedicated pop and click removers. The expanders worked by actively listening to the music and automatically making quiet passages even quieter while boosting louder sections, effectively increasing the perceived dynamic range sometimes up to 50% or more. Pop removers, such as the famous SAE 5000, used logic circuits to detect the extremely fast attack time of a scratch or click, then briefly muted the audio for a fraction of a second to erase the noise. In theory, these boxes were supposed to clean up and dramatize your music. In practice, they required constant tweaking and babysitting. Adjust the sensitivity too high and the unit would carve unnatural holes in the music or mistake a loud drum hit for a pop. Set it too low and it did almost nothing. Many users ended up riding the knobs throughout an entire record like a DJ trying to keep the mix perfect. The artifacts they sometimes added, unnatural pumping, breathing sounds, or chopped transients could be more distracting than the original noise they were trying to remove. When CDs arrived with their near-perfect dynamic range and almost zero surface noise, these processors became obsolete almost overnight. What was once considered cutting-edge technology quickly turned into a footnote in hi-fi history. They remain interesting examples of how far enthusiasts were willing to go to squeeze every last bit of performance out of imperfect analog formats. Bob Carver's sonic hologram generator. Audio genius Bob Carver always loved pushing boundaries. In the late 1970s, he introduced the sonic hologram generator, a device that promised to break your music free from the physical limitations of your two speakers and create a massive, immersive 3D soundstage. The problem it tried to solve is real. In a normal stereo setup, your left ear hears the left speaker clearly, but also picks up a slightly delayed and quieter signal from the right speaker, and vice versa. This acoustic crosstalk confuses the brain and collapses the stereo image. Carver's solution was clever. The generator took part of the right channel signal, inverted its phase, and injected it into the left speaker at a specific level and delay, and did the same in reverse for the left channel. When done correctly, these cancellation signals removed much of the crosstalk, allowing the music to appear to float in a wide, deep, three-dimensional space. Some listeners swore by it, describing a truly holographic experience where instruments seemed to occupy real positions in the room. However, it came with strict requirements. You had to sit in a very small, sweet spot. Move your head even a few inches and the effect collapsed dramatically. Room, acoustics, speaker placement, and listening distance all had to be nearly perfect. For most people, the hassle of maintaining that ideal setup outweighed the benefits. What started as an exciting breakthrough gradually became known as an interesting but high-maintenance novelty. It remains a fascinating chapter in audio history and shows just how creative engineers can be when trying to improve the stereo illusion. Polk SDA speakers. Matthew Polk took Bob Carver's crosstalk cancellation idea and pushed it even further this time by building the technology directly into the speakers themselves. In 1980, Polk Audio introduced the Stereo Dimensional Array, or SDA, speakers. Each massive SDA cabinet actually contained two separate speaker systems working together, a conventional stereo array and a special dimensional array. The left and right speakers were physically tethered together with a special proprietary interconnect cable, forming a triangle. This cable took the left channel signal, inverted its phase, and sent it to the right speaker's dimensional drivers, and vice versa. The goal was to acoustically cancel out the interaural crosstalk that normally collapses the stereo image. When everything aligned perfectly, the effect was genuinely impressive. The soundstage became enormous and holographic. Instruments and voices appeared to float in space with realistic depth and width that most conventional speakers couldn't match. Some listeners described it as the closest thing to a "you are there" experience in two-channel audio. However, the system had significant practical limitations. The interconnect cable required the amplifier or receiver to have a common ground. Many amplifiers didn't, and connecting them incorrectly could short the output stage and cause expensive damage. Even when wired correctly, the listener still had to sit in a very specific sweet spot, move your head too much or have friends sitting beside you, and the holographic effect collapsed. For solo critical listening in a carefully treated room, SDA speakers could be magical. For normal everyday use with friends or family, they were often more trouble than they were worth. Today, there is still a passionate cult following of Polk SDA fans who swear by the technology. But for most people, the restrictions were simply too much to deal with on a daily basis. Kenwood KR 6170 Jumbo Jet. This one might be my personal favorite on the entire list because it's so wonderfully ridiculous. In 1971, Kenwood decided to build the ultimate all-in-one receiver and release the KR 6170, affectionately nicknamed the Jumbo Jet. This beast wasn't content with just being a good receiver. It tried to be everything at once. It featured dedicated front panel inputs for microphones and electric guitars, plus a built-in electronic rhythm composer with 12 different drum patterns, including foxtrot, bossa nova, waltz, swing, rock, and more. There was even a foot switch input so you could turn the drum machine on and off hands-free. In theory, it was a complete home entertainment center. A stereo receiver, a karaoke machine, a guitar amplifier, and a drum machine all packed into one giant silver box. You could plug in your guitar, sing along to the radio or a record, and have the built-in drums backing you up. It was marketed as the ultimate party receiver for the creative musician. In reality, it tried to do too many things and ended up mediocre at most of them. The amplifier section was only rated at 33 watts per channel, which wasn't very powerful for the size. The guitar input sounded thin and disappointing. The drum patterns quickly felt dated and cheesy, and because the receiver was packed with so many complex features, it became a technician's nightmare to repair when things inevitably went wrong. Once the initial novelty wore off, most of the extra features sat unused. The average owner probably used it as a regular receiver and ignored the drum machine and guitar inputs after a few weeks. The KR6170 is a perfect time capsule of that early 1970s. More is better philosophy. It's a fun piece of hi-fi history that shows just how far some companies were willing to go to stand out. Quadrophonic sound. The 1970s quadrophonic craze was one of the biggest collective delusions in audio history. Manufacturers and record labels promised a revolutionary surround sound experience that would put you right in the middle of the music with 4 discrete channels. Suddenly, everyone from RCA and Columbia to Pioneer, Sansui, and JVC was pushing quad, but there were competing and mostly incompatible formats like SQ, QS, and CD4, each needing its own decoder. To get the full effect, you needed 4 speakers, a special quad receiver, extra wiring, and specially encoded records that were expensive and hard to find. Most people didn't want to rearrange their living rooms for it, and the software selection was tiny. Many early adopters ended up frustrated because the surround effect only sounded impressive on certain recordings, while regular stereo records often came out messy and phasey. By the late 1970s, Quadrophonic was basically dead and became one of the most expensive flops in consumer audio. Interestingly, the surround sound idea never really disappeared. It came back stronger in the 1990s with Dolby Digital and DTS in home theater systems. Quad remains a fascinating what-if moment that showed how eager the industry was to push new formats even when the technology and market weren't ready. Noise reduction systems, Dolby and DBX. Vinyl and especially cassette tapes were always fighting a war against background noise, with tape hiss being particularly annoying on cassettes. To solve this, companies like Dolby Laboratories and DBX introduced sophisticated noise reduction systems that became standard on almost every decent cassette deck in the 1970s and 80s. Dolby B was the most common, boosting high frequencies during recording and cutting them back during playback to hide the hiss, while Dolby C offered even stronger reduction for premium tapes. DBX took a more aggressive companion approach, compressing during recording and expanding on playback to deliver up to 30 decibels of noise reduction. In theory, these systems were brilliant and could make cassettes sound dramatically cleaner and more dynamic when everything matched perfectly. In reality, compatibility was a nightmare. Playing a Dolby encoded tape without the right decoding made the sound unnaturally bright and harsh, and mismatches were incredibly common because people often didn't know if a tape was encoded or not. DBX was even pickier, sounding fantastic when aligned, but pumping and breathing unnaturally with any level differences or tape wear. These systems were a necessary evil for the cassette era, but added another layer of complexity that casual users frequently got wrong. When CDs arrived with near-silent backgrounds, most people happily abandoned noise reduction forever. Built-in drum machine receivers. And here's the craziest one on the list, receivers with built-in drum machines. In the early 1970s, Kenwood and a few other bold manufacturers decided a regular stereo receiver wasn't enough, so they started adding full electronic rhythm composers with multiple drum patterns directly into high-end models. The most famous example is the Kenwood KR6170 Jumbo Jet, which included microphone and guitar inputs plus a built-in drum machine offering foxtrot, bossa nova, rock, and more, complete with a foot switch for hands-free control. In theory, it sounded like the ultimate party machine and home music studio in one box. In practice, it was peak gimmick. The amplifier was often underpowered for its size, the guitar input sounded thin and weak, and the drum patterns quickly became dated and cheesy. Because the units were packed with so many complex features, they were expensive and difficult to repair when things went wrong. Once the novelty wore off, most owners barely touched the drum machine again, leaving the extra circuitry to just sit inside the chassis. It briefly made some drummers nervous about being replaced by technology, but everyone soon realized how silly and limited those built-in rhythms sounded compared to real playing. This over-the-top, all-in-one approach perfectly captures the wild, experimental spirit of early 70s hi-fi. Those were 12 wild hi-fi gimmicks that somehow fooled us all. Some were fun for a moment, others were just plain ridiculous. The big lesson? Not every new feature is worth chasing. Sometimes the simplest, well-made gear gives you the most enjoyment in the long run. If you enjoyed this video, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Drop your own favorite or worst gimmick in the comments. I read every single one. Thanks for watching. I'm Raycole from Audio Legend. Keep it simple, keep it fun, and keep chasing great sound. See you next time.